Hello and welcome to Sports Forgotten Heroes, episode number 141, Chuck Foreman. I am so excited to bring this episode to you, as Chuck will join me as we talk about his great career and so much more, including his case for the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Now, I am quite sure that there are many of you out there that don't think Chuck belongs in the Hall of Fame, but there are also many of you out there, like me, who thinks his case for the Pro Football Hall of Fame is solid. I don't think you can argue the fact that his being neglected to ever be considered for the ultimate honor of enshrinement is a terrible oversight. Just look at the numbers and we'll get more deeply into them with Chuck. But as a tease, for his career, 8 years, Chuck Foreman combined to rush for and catch passes for 9,106 yards and score 73 touchdowns in 109 games. From the fullback position, he led the NFL in receptions in 1975 with 73. He revolutionized his position while playing with the Minnesota Vikings. And consider this, the year before he joined Minnesota, they went 7-7. He was drafted by the Vikings in 1973, won the Offensive Rookie of the Year award, and helped Minnesota to a 12-2 record and a first-place finish in the NFC Central. It was the first of 6 straight first-place finishes in the NFC Central. And he helped lead his team to the Super Bowl. Overall, he helped lead his team to 3 Super Bowls, and they've never been back since. So we have a lot to cover and discuss with Chuck, and we will. But first, please follow, rate, and review Sports Forgotten Heroes wherever it is you listen. Give the podcast a like right here on YouTube, and please don't forget, you can always follow Sports Forgotten Heroes on X, formerly Twitter, at Sports F Heroes, and you can also follow on Facebook. As always, thanks so much for your support. Okay, let's get into today's show with my special guest, Chuck Foreman. Chuck, welcome to Sports Forgotten Heroes. It is an honor and a pleasure. I am thrilled that you're here.
I'm happy to be here too. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, let's not beat around the bush. Let's start off right off the bat with the big question.
Right.
And that's about the Hall of Fame. Let me first say this, Chuck. When I look at the list of running backs in the Pro Football Hall of Fame and examine their stats, certainly there are those that there is absolutely no question that they deserve to be there. You know, the guys like Walter Payton and Emmitt Smith, Jim Brown, and Barry Sanders, Tony Dorsett. But there are also some in the Hall of Fame that leave me, well, let's say, scratching my head. Terrell David, certainly a great career. He played for 7 years, had a total of 8,887 yards and 65 touchdowns. Marion Motley, who I just did a podcast about, he played for 9 years. Of course, it was a shorter season when he played, only 12 games. He rushed for 5,000, or rushed and caught passes for a total of 5,827 yards and 38 touchdowns. And I think another good comparison is Larry Csonka, who played for 11 years, and he had a total of 8,901 yards and 68 touchdowns, and of course, many others. Chuck, you played for 8 years, combined between rushing the ball and catching the ball. You had 9,106 yards, 76 touchdowns. I got to ask, how come you're not in the Hall? What does everybody say?
I really can't answer that question other than the fact that I heard some rumor that I didn't play long enough. That was back. I don't know. I really don't know how that whole thing. I didn't even really know how the whole thing worked until this year. In fact, I was really shocked to find out that I've never been on the list to be considered. Now, I can't speak for the players that came before me, nor can I speak for the players that came after me, Mr. Davis and all those. I really can't even elaborate on that. But the only thing I can tell you is from the time I stepped into that league until the time I left, I was one of the 2 or 3 best in the game.
No question.
Bud Grant told me, and Jerry Burns told me, but Bud told me, he says, Chuck, you're going to be the best in the game. And we're going to move you to fullback, which I'm saying, why? I'm not playing fullback. I'm thinking I'm going to block. But he says, you can block, you can catch, we're going to do this. We're going to create something different. And now I'm going to tell you, we're going to use your skills as a receiver in the slot from out of the backfield and all these other things. Now, that part of your game, you're not even going to get recognized for. But, you're only going to get recognized for your rushing yards from the line of scrimmage. And I couldn't quite figure that out. But he said you're going to be the best in the game.
And I actually have that right here. He told you that you'll be the best running back in the NFL, but you're not going to be recognized as such.
But you got to remember, I played fullback. There's a difference. From our offensive scheme, I played the same position Larry Csonka played, but I played it differently. My skill set was different. Larry was a run over kind of guy. I ran over you when I had to. But I could also go out there and do the other things that the so-called running back can do, which I was too. So I had all that. But he told me that, and he was right.
Yeah, well,
right, 100%. You're going to be the best. And for my stretch, I'm not taking second best to anybody. I don't care who it is. I know before I got to the Vikings, they were 7-7. When I came in and they created this new offense, we called the purple offense. And then somebody tried to say it was the West Coast offense, but that's our offense. It got some recognition, but when after we got here, we implemented that. We went to 3 Super Bowls, should have went to 4 or 5. And so that's all I can say. I really had no clue as to why I'm not in the Hall of Fame, but the thing that shocked me even more was the fact that I was never even on the list to be considered to be in the Hall of Fame. Now that's what knocked me on my feet.
Yeah, that really is surprising. And the comparison you mentioned, Larry Csonka, no question, not taking anything away from Larry.
No, not at all.
He played 3 more years than you, and you played at the same time. He played 11 years. You played 8 years. Combined, he had a total of 8,901 yards. You had 9,106 yards, and you scored more touchdowns. Go figure. It's just stunning.
Yeah, I don't know. It's crazy, but I'm in a good place. So I know I belong there. No doubt about it. I guess that's a place where I'm at that makes it all like, like I told you, the Hall of Fame being in there is one thing, but to not even be on the list to be considered, now that's the part that just blew me away.
Yeah, no question, because Chuck, I watched football back then, and you were one of the most feared offensive players in the league at that time.
Mm-hmm.
You were tough. And speaking of tough, and you mentioned his name, Bud Grant, I gotta ask, what was it like playing for Bud Grant? What kind of coach was he, and did you like the offenses he ran?
Well, I know what they ran before I got here. I know we started running when I got here. But the thing that I I was very fortunate to be drafted by the Vikings, simply because number one, they had a very mature team, a lot of great leadership. Bud certainly was a strict kind of coach, but he had his rules, and if you did all you were supposed to do, no problem. He was a guy that didn't tolerate mistakes. He was a guy that I thought was fair, and at the time I came in the league, it was pretty much, as far as how can I put it, expanding as far as players of color.
Mm-hmm.
It was getting out. It was done. It was there, and he had a group of guys that were just. He had a team of professionals. It's a whole difference. You can be a pro. I'm talking about professionals, and we had, wow, some guys that I could just, Bud told me when I got to the team after the All-Star game, he says, "Okay, here's what I want you to do." I said, "Okay." See that number 41 and that number 30? I said, that was Bill Brown, Dave Osborne. I said, yeah, just do everything they do and you'll be fine. And that's what I did. And they, with their knowledge of the position, especially being me going to fullback, and they knew I was there to take their place, but they shared it all with me because pretty much I played 1 year running back in Miami, 1 year wide receiver, cornerback. I played them all. And I never really concentrated on one position in Miami. I can say that was because I could play at everything, and they needed me at these different positions. But I never had the opportunity to go to Miami and just be a running back. But I always considered myself a football player, and so it helped me in a lot of ways for sure. Yeah, as far as my versatility, my ability to do all these kind of things. I had a coach named Larry Beckish, who was my receivers coach at Miami. I had a guy by the name of Whitey Campbell. He was my running back coach. And then there was a guy named Jimmy Dye. He was my defensive backfield coach. And those are the guys that developed me as a total football player. When I left my high school from Roy Comer and Adam Craven to those guys. And that's how it happened.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of Miami, if I read correctly, at
Right.
first, you were not enthralled with going to Minnesota, and I could sort of understand it. You're going from Miami,
Right.
beautiful warm weather, to cold Minnesota. Tell us about how you learned that the Vikings had drafted you and what your immediate thoughts were about playing in Minnesota.
Well, I was down in my apartment down in a place called Marion, Florida, which is south of Miami. At the time, I had a couple of guys, my roommate Jim Rydell. I had Frank Thomas, a couple of friends from my hometown came down. We were just sitting in my apartment when the phone came during the draft day. And that got a call from Jim Finks. He said, "Hey, we just drafted you in Minnesota." I was like, "What?" And that's what my initial reaction was. And then, of course, he says, "We're going to get you a ticket. You come on up here." And they gave, so I came on up. And Minnesota was different than any place I had been. I grew up on the East Coast in Maryland, Washington, D.C., Baltimore area, went to Miami, but Minnesota was out there in the Midwest. And it was just a laid back kind of place from my perspective anyway, from where, Miami's one of those, it was a hopping city, even though we were in Coral Gables, but I was blessed to come here because the people were good. The team was good. The team was mature. It was everything a rookie would need to be successful. And the ownership was good when I got here. Then they brought another guy in. That was a whole nother story, but it was a great experience.
Gotta ask, how does a guy from Frederick, Maryland, wind up at the University of Miami instead of maybe even the bigger schools such as Nebraska, Oklahoma, Alabama, Penn State, Notre Dame, USC, or even locally the University of Maryland?
Well, I could have went to Maryland, no question about it. I went to Penn State for a visit. That's a whole nother story. I had to tell you that story before I get over here. And I got letters from Michigan State, all those schools. of course, all the HBCU schools, every one of them sent me letters, of course. And of course, one team came to our school from, I think it was Howard University, and coach came up there and told our coach, "Hey, we want the whole team." We had a lot of really great athletes out there, but I think that might have been a recruiting pitch, but whatever. But we had a lot of great players there. But I went to a visit to Penn State, right? Because my coach Adam Craven knew, Joe Paterno. And so we got in the car, we drove up to Penn State. We went for the visit, went to a game and stuff like that. And then we got to go into the office, and Coach Craven was in. They watched the film and stuff like that. And we watched some film of Penn State. And then the coach comes out, Paterno comes up, "Well, you guys got a good team." I think these, but I don't think you're Penn State material.
Huh, interesting.
This is you got to hear this. And we had already watched the film, right? And watched their players that they had. And when he said that, me and the guy that I was up there with, Ron Proctor, he was a linebacker, we just busted out laughing right in front of Joe Paterno's face. And our coach got upset. And he says, "What are you doing?" I'm saying, "Coach." He said, "We can't play with that mess." With the players that he had. That's how we were a little cocky at the time too, but because we didn't even lose a game. Mm-hmm. And we played against all these players, and we watched the film of Penn State, and I'm like, heck, some of those guys couldn't have made our high school team.
Wow.
You know what I mean? You're going to tell us we couldn't play for it, but the thing about it is I saw Paterno a few years later in Baltimore at a touchdown club thing there. I will give him credit, though. He came up to me and said, "We made a big mistake with you." Yeah, I know you did. But it was cool. He came back, and at least he said something about it,
Sure.
But but I ended up in Miami because we played against a team called Bel Air High School of Baltimore, and we from Frederick, smaller school. They had these great big recruits. Miami was recruiting 2 or 3 players off of that team. And of course, we beat them up pretty good. And I think I had I don't know how many touchdowns, but I had 3 called back. And that was from a tight end position. And I played tight end defensive tackle in high school. And when I went to Miami, I went there as a tight end defensive tackle until we ran 40s. And they didn't know I was state champion in Maryland in the hurdles 2 years in a row, right? And so I knew I was quick off the ball. I knew from 0 to 40, I could run with anybody. Now, after that, I might top off, but I'll get you for 40. So they recruited this guy his name was Bruce Bishop. He's like a movie star looking guy. He was supposed to be the fastest guy they recruited. I just said, well, let me get this out the way right now. As soon as he got up there to run, I jumped right on it, and I beat him. Uh-huh. And after that, our coach, at the time we played freshman football, and our coach, Bester Newcomb, came up to me and says, "Hey, I don't think you're going to be playing tight end or defensive tackle for me. You ever try running back?" And that's where it all started. Cool. Yeah, it was really. I had a lot of really cool coaches in high school and college, and they really were really special.
Tell me about the Gold Dust twins.
Well, that was me and Tom Sullivan. Somebody gave us. We were scoring touchdowns down at Miami and making big plays. We didn't have the biggest team or anything like that, but we were making plays. And Tom Sullivan was, he played with the Eagles. I played with the Vikings, and we were just a great combination together. We had a guy also by the name of Tom Smith. We got him from Iowa. He transferred from Iowa to Miami, and he was more of a blocker, but boy, he was good too. And he ended up playing with the Dolphins. So all 3 of us ended up in the professional ranks. And so the Gold Dust twins, that's how it happened. And, we scored a lot of touchdowns.
You sure?
A lot of big plays, right.
You sure did.
Yeah.
How about the head coach? How'd you get along with him, Fran Kersey?
Fran was my first coach, of course, was Charlie Tate. He was the guy that recruited me. Mm-hmm. Then think they, back in the day, they hung him in the effigy or no, the campus college kids did that. But anyway, they let him go. And then a guy by the name of Walt Krzyzewski came in. Okay, he was a longtime Miami player and coach, and just when you talk in Miami, you can't talk in Miami without talking about Walter Krzyzewski. And then Frank Kersey came in from Tampa, and of course Tampa at the time was noted for like kind of a school where all the bad guys went. But he coached them up. They had some great players that went to the pros. Had a guy by the name of Noah Jackson played at the Chicago Bears for a long time, and they had a running back, the greatest running back I ever saw. That he played, but his name was Leon X-Ray McQuay. And I'd never seen anybody run a ball like that. I mean, he was quick, he was fast, he was everything, but I think he had some types of issues or something like that. He played in Canada for Toronto for a few years. Somebody said he averaged like close to 10 yards a carry.
Wow. Wow.
And then he went to the New York Giants for 1 year, and then after that, I didn't hear much about him. But to me, as far as talent goes, I've never seen anybody like that.
Wow, that's saying a lot.
With these eyes, anyway. I mean, I was like, wow. I mean, he could do some things that, like, I don't know. He was different. Unfortunately, he didn't last long.
Mm-hmm. Well, like we said, University of Miami, you get drafted by the Minnesota Vikings. So what was it like to play in Minnesota? You were part of a great team that made it to 3 Super Bowls. You said you should have made it to more. What was it like to play in Minnesota at Metropolitan Stadium? I mean, I guess the only thing I can think of in today's game that would be comparable would be either Lambeau Field or where Buffalo plays, Rich Stadium, in the dead of winter. What was it like to play in Minnesota?
Well, we had the greatest fans, especially in the winter when the weather was super cold. And me from Miami, even though I was from Maryland, I wasn't in that kind of weather. Especially you get to December, late November, December, and then playoff time, and those people were sitting out there in that cold weather. The stadium was always packed. We had the greatest fans. Like I remember, like after games, we didn't go out and have dinner anywhere. All we did was went out to the parking lot, and people had everything laid out for us to have. Anything you wanted. It was like the fans and the players were really connected in that time in my era. But then, of course, it started getting a little crazy, and then they separated the fan and the player pretty much, as far as how they couldn't connect at the games like we used to. But those were some of the greatest times I've ever had. Some of the best food I've ever had. Some of the nicest people I've ever met, because we were able to dialogue with them, to hang out, and all that. We come out after the game, say, well, okay, where am I going to go? Oh, I know Mr. So-and-so has this. We'll go get some ribs over here. We'll get some chicken over here. We'll get something over here. Everybody had, and they would do it every Sunday.
Wow.
Just wait until we came out, and we just stopped by all the different places, all the different, I guess, what do you call it?
Tents, tailgates.
The tailgate places. And so it was always fun that way, because we were really connected truly with the fan up here. And so it was exciting when you look up there in that cold weather, especially when the weather was coming, and then when the snow came, and then when that sun started to set behind that stadium, then it got like 20 degrees colder, especially playoff time. It was like, it was our game then, because it was different.
How much of a home field advantage was it, especially in November and December? Did the opposition, did teams like, Green Bay or Dallas or the warm weather teams, did they like going to Minnesota? You guys must have had such an advantage.
We had a big advantage. And, back in those days, at the end of the year, it was always the Vikings and the Rams. And, they'd come to Minnesota. They'd be favored to win, but we beat them every time. And then one time we went out to L.A. and they were supposed to beat us there, but there was a rainstorm. And the weather was horrible, but they called it the Mud Bowl, and we beat them out there too. But every time they'd come, Bud would make us go out in pregame warm-ups with hardly nothing on, other than just a short sleeves and stuff. Now, it'd be freezing our tails off. He said, don't let them know what you're feeling. Don't let them know what you're feeling. And I just followed followed the leader, like the Jim Marshalls and all Carl, all those guys, and they go out there with hardly nothing on and just start talking to the players like, hey, it's cold out, isn't it? Man, how you gonna make it through the game? They had so much stuff on they could barely move. So it was a great experience being here in Minnesota. We had like I said, the fans were great. I was fortunate to play with a coach like Bud Grant, and had Jerry Burns was special because he was a guy that created that offense. And then I had Bus Murdy's. He was my running back coach, and he kind of knew I was kind of a sensitive guy. So he knew how to deal with me. So I think I was very lucky from that aspect to be with an organization at the time that was pretty dialed into how to treat the players.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's get back to the field. So the Vikings draft you, and before you know it, you become a very important part of their offense. Your rookie season, you rushed for 801 yards and you scored 4 touchdowns, caught 37 passes for 362 yards, 2 for touchdowns. In the playoffs, 137 yards rushing, 38 on passes, crossed the goal line once. The Vikings, as you said, went from a 7-7 team before you got there to 12-2, and you made it to the Super Bowl against the Miami Dolphins. What was the adjustment like going from warm weather Miami to brutally cold Minnesota? Did you have to approach the game differently? And what was it like going from college ball to pro ball? What were the main differences?
Well, I think the game is much faster from college to pro. Even from my position, it's like much faster. You got the best of the best of the best up there. And, generally from the positions that I played, here's the way I look at it as far as a runner goes. Either you can run it or you can't. Now, the only thing about a runner, he has to know when he sees that hole up here when I'm at the pro level, there's no time. When you make that decision, you better go. Whether it's the right one or the wrong one. You catching the ball, that's a whole nother thing. Those skilled positions are just that. Either you can do it or you can't. Simple as that. It's not a whole lot of other than picking up blitzes and recognizing, for me, coming out of the backfield where the middle linebacker is, where the outside linebackers are, and how I can set them up to get to where I need to be, that type of thing. But, so that adjustment there was, for me, easy. But the weather, adapting to that, it's a little more physical because I remember after my first game, I never felt, like I did, like when I was in college, I could just go on and do whatever I want to do. After that Monday morning, I was like, man, this hurt a little bit. I'm feeling a little sore. I remember Bud asking me after my first game when we were walking down to the meeting. He says, well, how you feeling? I'm like, I'm a little sore. He said, yeah, a little different. I said, yeah, it is. So that's, that part of it was easy, not easy, but I like I said, I had a lot of guys that were professionals, and they showed us the way and putting the work in. As far as being on the field, you couldn't be there with Bud if you made mistakes, and so that part of it, knowing your game plan, being able to recognize defenses, and I got picked up that pretty quick. And so, and then playing in the cold weather, of course, We practiced like we played. So, we went out there for about an hour and 20 minutes, but it was a hard hour and 20 minutes. And then he brings in, he knew how to manage time when it came to the players.
Mm-hmm. In the playoffs, you took care of Washington that year, 27-20. In the NFC Championship, you romped over Dallas 27-10, but then you stumbled against Miami in the Super Bowl, lost 24-7. Talk about that first experience you had in the playoffs and how tough a team the Dolphins were back then.
Well, I had the privilege to watch the Dolphins for a few years when I was down in Miami. Of course, Coach Shula was one of the best ever coach. They were very well disciplined, very, I don't know, much like the Vikings of our time, of my time. Very disciplined, a lot of professionals, a lot of great athletes. They had Murphy Morris, they had Jim Kick, they had Larry Csonka, they had Paul Warfield. That's on the offensive side, and they had Greasy there. And so the offensive line, Jim Langer and all those guys, they were, they were a tough team, a smart team, and consistent. And so that was the only team I played in a Super Bowl that I thought was better than us. I did, because they were very well coached, very disciplined in everything that they did. And of course, I used to go watch the practices when I was at Miami. They used to work out at our facility down at the University of Miami. So, unfortunately, we had an opportunity to meet a lot of those guys, Murphy Morris and Jim Kick. And, they, used to let us hang out with them a little bit and watch them practice. And so it was a great experience. And so Miami, when you see them every day and you see the consistency, that offense, that defense, that was the best team we played in the Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of people don't remember. They went to 3 straight.
Right.
Hey, at that point, the Vikings, well, you guys were becoming a great team. You had the defense, the Purple People Eaters. Your offense was dynamic with you and Fran Tarkenton and John Gillum and Stu Voigt, even Ed Marinero. In fact, many say your offense, as you alluded to earlier, was the predecessor to the West Coast offense. Talk about the Vikings offense during those years and how it was set up and structured so differently than from the offenses people were used to seeing in the NFL.
Well, I think with us, when we started, when Jerry Burns put that, what we call a purple offense in, he incorporated, because we had some good athletes in the backfield. Ed Marinell, he could block and catch. He could, he could do a little bit of everything also. And so did Oscar Reed, and we had the bangers and Bill Brown and Dave Osborne. But they created this offense because it was something nobody else was doing. And we, moved me around in the slot, even outside as a wide receiver, coming out of the backfield with split backfields. When that backfield was split, you better be thinking about what's going to happen, because something definitely was going to happen. And when it came to being one-on-one with the linebacker, case closed. They just didn't have a chance. I mean, that's not a bragging point. That was one of the things I was really good at, was just like coming out, reading the positions, and just getting open. And so going in the slot, being able to run that, being a wide receiver at Miami, I ran pretty good patterns. When I was outside, I could do the same. So it created something different way before anybody else. Because, back in when I first came to the league, it was a run-dominant league. And it was all the way through for the most part. And then we started opening up. And then, of course, there was, I think, Lydell Mitchell in Baltimore was catching passes, but not like me. He was catching them out of the backfield, and they started incorporating people like that in there. And so I guess Jerry Burns and Bud were way ahead of their time as far as offensive innovations go, because nobody else was doing it like that. And so we were able to incorporate that in an NFL that wasn't really geared for that type of an offense at the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, Chuck, I think the offense really revolved around you and Fran Tarkenton. Talk about your relationship with Fran and just how great a quarterback he was. This is amazing to me. Even though he is in the Hall of Fame, I don't think he gets the recognition he actually deserves either.
Well, Fran was very smart quarterback. Of course, back in his day at 6 feet tall, they thought he was too short, and that a scrambler couldn't play in the NFL because back in the time they wanted just drop back passers. He changed all that concept from the quarterback point of view anyway. And you got to remember, in those days there was nobody in your ear making calls for you or telling you what defense is coming up. It was always, he had to have total recall on everything that he was doing as far as what defenses he was going to see. He saw changes. He had to make that audible. Of course, we all had to be able to check off and do what we had to do. But it's a whole totally different game, and the responsibilities of a quarterback back then were a whole lot more complicated, let's say, for lack of a better word, than it is today, because he alone made those calls and adjustments. Now they got you in the earpieces and they can tell you what's coming. They make the calls for you. And so, of course, you still have to execute. But Fran was one of those guys that's one of the best to ever play the game.
Mm-hmm. Well, like I said, I don't think he gets the recognition that he deserves, and I think you are just terribly overlooked as well. How much of a factor do you think perhaps not winning the Super Bowl plays against you in your hopes of one day being inducted into the Hall of Fame?
Well, like I say, I really don't understand what the Super Bowl has to do with a great player. What I did on the field should be considered. And if that's what they're using to define whether a guy belongs in the Hall of Fame, then there's probably some of them that shouldn't be, that are already there.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, Chuck, when you take a look at all that, plus the fact that you were the 1973 Offensive Rookie of the Year, you were in the Pro Bowl in 1973, 74, 75, 76, 77, twice, top 5 for NFL MVP, and you're doing this as a fullback. You're doing this as someone who is redefining the position by not only rushing the ball, but you are catching the ball, and you are incredibly effective at both. It's a head scratcher.
No, I have no clue what's going on there. I've heard recently, since we've done this kind of campaign thing, about what they consider for a Hall of Fame player. And then I look at the things that I accomplished. I'm talking about in my era.
Sure.
I can't speak to what came before or after. I'm just talking about in my time.
Yeah.
I'm lost for words to tell you.
I think
not even in the conversation, to be quite honest with you. So the only thing I can say is, like, I don't know what it is, but like I said before, I've never even been on the list to be considered. And that is a mind blower.
Yeah, that's the real head scratcher.
The real mind blower for me.
Yeah.
That's what that just throws me way off kilter. But after that, I'm seeing players that are in there that it took 20 years for them to even get to that level or to accomplish what I've done. It's like, how many yards, rushing and receiving in a game on a consistent basis. Well, I don't know. But, it's when you look down and you see the guys that are in that Hall of Fame from a fullback position, even running back position. Come on.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt.
It's not even fair
Well, let's take a look at some of these other things. Like 1975, that was quite possibly your best. You rushed for over 1,000 yards. You rushed for 13 touchdowns. You led the NFL from the fullback position in receptions with 73. Lydell Mitchell, who you mentioned earlier, was second, and he wasn't even close at 60. You caught passes for 9 touchdowns. Gave you 22 overall for that season. As great as those numbers were, there was disappointment. Last game of the season against Buffalo.
Right.
You're looking to lead the league in touchdowns, break the record for combined rushing and receiving yards for a season. He did score 4 touchdowns. As great as all that was, there was disappointment. Talk about that.
Well, I missed the Triple Crown by just 6 yards. Wow. Remember that. And I didn't play the last 3 or 4 quarter, the third and fourth quarter. I didn't play that much. I didn't get back in the game. I don't know what part. I think it was in the third quarter. I got the snowball thrown in the eye, so I was kind of like taken out of the game.
And that's the snowball in the eye. You are not saying that in sarcasm. A snowball was really thrown and hit you in the eye.
Right. So I had some double vision for a minute, and then Bud didn't put me back in the game. But I had no clue what my stats were. I didn't keep up with all that stuff at the time. I was just playing football. But then after the fact, I missed the Triple Crown, which would have been the first time in history of running, receiving, and catching and scoring. So, I think Jim Otis won the rushing title that year. But just a 6 yards more than me. But probably had I played that entire game, I may have scored a couple more touchdowns. Probably had, from the way the game was going, I probably would have had another 70, 80 yards.
Wow. Well, well, you came back in 1976 and proved it wasn't a fluke because you rushed for a career high that year, 1,115 yards. You scored another 13 touchdowns, caught 55 passes for 567 yards, a touchdown, led the Vikings to another Super Bowl appearance after you pounded Washington 35-20. You beat the Rams 24-13. Unfortunately, though, you lost in the Super Bowl to Oakland, the Raiders, 32-14. Those were great years for you. But again, disappointment not winning the Super Bowl. How great were those years and how disappointing? It's a silly question, but these are the questions we always ask. How disappointing is it to lose? Well, you said earlier that you think the only team that you were not as good as was the Dolphins,
right?
But you lost Super Bowls. What happened against Oakland?
Oh, well, I think Oakland, and we were down the score, and they didn't call my number. It was a fumble. That changed the game. Normally, I would have jumped over that for 2 yards. That's like I had a 40-inch vertical leap. So that changed the game. That was disappointing, and but I don't know. Just even now, just to talk about it is just like very difficult for me because you go one, no, okay, we lost first. Second one, I know we're not going to lose this third. There's no way we were going to, and we ended up losing. I don't know. It's a lot of things you can attribute it to, but it was, to me, that third one was like, that was just tough to take.
Well, let's talk about something happier. Over the course of 3 seasons, 1974, 1975, 1976, I think you had as good of a 3-year stretch as almost anyone in NFL history. During that period, you scored 35 touchdowns. You rushed for over 3,000 yards. You caught 181 passes, 16 for touchdowns for a total of 1,844 yards. By the way, this was during a time when the NFL was a 14-game season, not a 16 or 17 like they play today. Incredible. What was that like during that period? I mean, talk about, Chuck, you were the guy back then. I mean, it was playing at such a high level. What is that like?
Well, first of all, you got to remember 1,000 yards was a milestone for a running back, fullback in that time. You got 1,000 yards, you were like, that was the greatest thing you could accomplish back then. Of course, the games changed. You got more games they play, and all that kind of stuff. Well, and that's why when I say you look at my stats, you can't compare them to today's, because it's a whole different game and a whole different way they're doing things. And you can hold every play now, pretty much do all that. But in my era, in that time, it was quite the accomplishment. And when you look at the running backs, the average running back lasts 3 years or something like that. But to play at that high level like that for 6 or 7 years, that's a heck of an accomplishment. So, and it was like a run-dominant game at that time, other than the fact that the Vikings came in with throwing passes to running backs and receivers. We actually changed the way the offensive game was played. No question about it. We never get credit for it, but I guess that's the way the cookie crumbles.
Well, you played at a time, Chuck, when football was different. You played against the Steel Curtain. You played against the Doomsday defense. You played against, the no-name defense.
Yeah.
You played against maybe one of the dirtiest teams in the history of pro football in the Oakland Raiders. I mean, you played against some of the toughest teams and some of the toughest players in the history of the NFL. What was that like?
It was interesting for sure. You definitely better have your head on the swivel. Because, it didn't matter whether you had the ball or not, you're going to get a hit. And you better, and you know what? I learned one thing. Jim Brown told me one thing. When we were at some type of thing, and he was congratulating me, and he said these words. He says, "Run smart." I'm like, okay, what does that mean? He says, know when you have to go down in this league, because when you stand up, you're giving them free shots at you. That's when you get hurt. So that was the greatest advice, he gave me. It was like, hey, you got to know when to go down. And when you don't know that, he said, you got to come back for another play. You don't want to be there, struggling just to get 3 inches. Come back and get the whole 10 yards. And that's one of the things. You got to run smart. And so, especially in my era, because they would take shots at you. I mean, it was a little dirty. No question about it. It was trying to get you out. Oh, we're going to get him out the game. But I tried not to give him. I had this coach, Whitey Campbell, down at the University of Miami. I told you about him earlier. And he said one thing to me. He says, Chuck, they can't hit what they can't touch. And so that's why he says, just keep running the way you are, and you'll be just fine.
And again, you did all this from the fullback position.
Right.
You were the first in Vikings history to rush for over 200 yards in one game. Mm-hmm. You were one of the best ever to catch passes out of the backfield. And it's not hyperbole, that's fact. Chuck, you played a physical style of football. You helped lead the Vikings to 3 NFC Championships, into 3 Super Bowls, Offensive Rookie of the Year. You were an All-Pro. And again, the head scratcher. There's one thing missing from your resume, and that is enshrinement into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And that real head scratcher is, as you said, is you've never even been considered. You've never been on a list.
And considering that I was the UPI and the Sporting News Player of the Year twice.
Yeah, it's
75 and 76. So that never even gets mentioned. Not once, but twice. Play NFC Offensive Player of the Year or whatever. But
well, Chuck, I think my question is this.
Right.
I don't know if you can answer it. I'm sure that after you first learned that you've never even been considered. You must have spoken to some people, and some people must have said to you or given you some sort of explanation, or at least tried to. Um, have has anybody said anything to you? And I guess,
Um,
um, um, is there still an opportunity?
I have, okay, now I gotta put this in the, I don't know that my team ever promoted me for the
Oof.
thing, to be quite honest with you. What we're doing now is from a gentleman and some people that I work with, Ben Tice, his group. We had a videographer, one of the best. You might have seen it. I'm not sure. They're the ones that are Tom Moore. Uh, I can mention. I'm missing some people, but my mind is not there. But two, three other people, and put this whole program together, presentation together, to make sure people, whoever the committee is, to see. It's right there in front of your eyes. Okay, now wait a minute. There's something wrong with this picture. If these guys in here, they made some comparisons with about 4 other players that are in there that don't have, that they got players in there that never been to a playoff game, don't have my credentials, but yet they're there. And so, but the fact that I've never even been on the list to be considered, as I said before, is the part that really blows me away, especially in my era. And so I'm having a hard time understanding that. Not now. I'm good with it now that I just found out this year that I've never been on the list. And so why is that? And so I don't know. But listen, here's what I'm going to say. We're making an effort this year to bring that to people that need to know, and hopefully it works. If not, then Chuck Foreman is going to let that part of his life go and move forward. And I told I don't want to know anything about the Hall of Fame. When I say that, don't bring it up to me anymore, because I'm in a completely good place, knowing in my heart, in my mind, that I'm a Hall of Fame football player. And I'm talking about my era. I ain't talking about before. I'm not talking about it. I'm talking about in my time. In that time, there were some guys that's good, but none better.
You can't argue that, no doubt. One day, I hope to be watching the TV special when there's a knock on your door and somebody is standing there with the gold blazer and marking the moment when Chuck Foreman finds out that he has been honored and with enshrinement into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Chuck, I can't thank you enough for joining me on Sports Forgotten Heroes. This has been a real thrill and an honor. I want to thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate you having me on. I've been looking forward to it for the last few days. And thanks for giving me your platform to make people aware of, what's happening with my career, my life, and giving me the opportunity to make my statement as far as why I deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. And so I'm very appreciative.
You got it, Chuck. Anytime. Anytime.
Thank you.
To me, I think Chuck makes a very compelling argument for enshrinement. Hey, I've spoken to several other very knowledgeable football fans, and well, they're pretty split. But consider the numbers I shared with you during today's show. The numbers don't lie. And as Bud Grant said, Foreman was going to put up numbers but get very little recognition for doing so. But again, the numbers don't lie. And to those who make the decisions, I think they should go back, take a look at what Chuck Foreman did, and at worst, put his name in front of those who do make the decisions and let them decide whether or not Chuck Foreman should be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Thanks again to Chuck for joining me on Sports Forgotten Heroes, and thanks to all of you for your support once again. And I will see you next time on Sports Forgotten Heroes.